Hello?
Do I need to do that over again, or are we good?
Okay. Good evening, council members, staff, and meeting participants. Thank you for joining us this evening for the May 5th, 2020 Monte Sereno City Council meeting. Prior to the roll call, I would like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that this City Council meeting is being conducted pursuant to provisions of the Brown Act and the recent executive order issued by the governor to facilitate teleconferencing to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission at public meetings. The Brown Act sets strict rules for teleconferencing. It requires that each teleconference location be identified in the notice and agenda, that it be accessible to the public, that members of the public be allowed to address the councils from their location, that the agenda be posted at that location, that at least one member be here in the council chambers, and at least in a quorum of the council be participating from within the Monte Sereno. The governor's executive order has suspended those rules. The executive order does require that we continue to notice meetings in advance and that we provide members of the public an opportunity to offer public comment. Before the meeting is called to order, I'd like to point out a few things to assist council members, staff, and members of the public to successfully participate in this meeting. Council members, please keep your microphones muted until you wish to speak. You have a hot mic. At the top left, there is a presenter chat. Council members should use this to report technical problems such as an inability to hear. At the top left, there is also an attendee chat. This is for the public to report technical problems. For the public to comment under oral communication or any agenda item, at the top center of the screen, there is a caption box where comments limited to 500 words can be submitted and will be read into the record. This limit is set to adhere to the typical 3-minute allowance. Only attendees using the application can submit questions. Participation from the telephone will allow for listening only and does not allow for any feedback. And finally, because we are not all in the same room, all votes at the meeting will be taken by roll call. If the mayor would like to call the meeting to order, I can then continue with roll call.
Thank you, Gloissy. The Monte Sereno City Council meeting for May 5th, 2020 is now called to order. Roll call, please.
Yes. Councilmember Elahi?
Present?
Councilmember Labouvet?
Present.
Councilmember Turner?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Luthold? And Mayor Lawler?
Present.
Great, thank you.
In lieu of Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, I'd like to take this time to thank our community for their commitment to adhering to the stay-at-home guidelines and helping our neighbors and others during this crisis. From volunteer efforts to making face masks for healthcare workers, we thank you. Okay, moving on to orders of the day. Are there any changes to the orders of the day? Seeing none. Gloissy, oral communications. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on items not on the agenda?
None to report at this time, Mayor Lawler.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to written communications. Do we have any written communications at this time? Mr. Leonardis? Nope, okay. Moving on to the consent calendar. Are there any council members wishing to speak on an item on the consent calendar? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar? All right.
Motion to approve.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
And council members, this is Sergio. I would, however, like to pull item 3 because there is a typographical error which apparently did not make it in. The correction did not make it into the agenda. So as I'm looking at it, Section 3 of the resolution mentions giving notice in the manner required by Government Code Section 12109. That really should just say give notice in the manner required by the Elections Code. And other than that, I think that the item is fine.
Okay, thank you. So we can go ahead and approve with those changes, approve the consent calendar with those changes to resolution 1684. Where, Sergio, I'm sorry, where is it? It's in that is it item 3 or 4?
It is item 3, section 4 of that resolution.
Section 4. Okay, that's on our paragraph there. Okay. All right, then do we take roll call?
I can proceed with taking roll call.
Thank you.
Councilmember Elahi?
Yes.
Councilmember Labouvet?
Yes.
Councilmember Turner?
Here.
Mayor Pro Temp Luthol?
Yes.
And Mayor Lawler?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so the motion passes 5-0. Is that right?
Yes, motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to public hearings. Looks like there aren't any. On to new business. Item 7, consider strategies to pre-fund OPEB and manage pension liabilities. Mr. Leonardis, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lawler. So this evening we have before you some opportunities to look at the, prior to our budget hearing coming up in the month of May, our pre-budget and then our formal budget hearing, some opportunities to look at different ideas to allocate funds to address things like long-term pension obligations and our OPEB medical post-employment benefits and the balances on those accounts that we are obligated to pay over time. So I have with me this evening on the phone Joe D'Onofrio from Bartell and Associates. They prepared much of the documentation that you see in the report this evening, and I have our interim finance manager, Reynold Samaronis, here this evening as well. So we are all on the phone. We are able to answer questions. I assume you all had plenty of time to look at these numbers, and I will open the floor to questions.
All right, thank you. I think I'll just start from left to right this time. So I'll go to my left with Councilmember Labouvet.
Hi. Actually, I prepared some slides to discuss this. So Steve, so Joseph is not going to give a little bit of a presentation about his written materials first, or should we just move into?
Joe, Mr. D'Onofrio, would you like to share a few words about your report?
Can you hear me first?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. I wasn't sure. So, let me see. I have our report here. Let me get it. Okay. So there's an attachment. Our report, if you go down to a page that says CalPERS funded status projection on the top, that's one of the exhibits we prepared. A table with a bunch of numbers on it. It says slide 1 on the bottom. Okay, so I'll assume you found that. So I think the city manager had in his report that the CalPERS pension plan unfunded CalPERS projected it to be $688,000 on June 30, 20. And what we did, is project it out a little different because we know what the market, what the CalPERS return was for 18-19, and then we looked at what the unfunded liability in the pension plan would be if the return for 1920 was not what CalPERS expected. So CalPERS expects 7%. So on that chart, the first row and third column, the unfunded is $707,000 on 6/30/20, and that's close to the number you have from CalPERS. So a month or so ago, when the market was down 30%, we were telling our clients what this might look like and under different scenarios for 1920. And now, if we looked at it today, I would say CalPERS might be close to a 0% return this year. But as you know, the market's going up and down 1%, 2%, 3% every day in one or the other direction. So if the return was 0% for this year, your unfunded would be $1,044,000. So this chart gives you a little sense of the sensitivity to what the unfunded would be at the end of this fiscal year due to the return that we'll see by the end of June, relative to 7% expected. The chart on the next slide, slide 2, amortizes that unfunded amount over 10 years, which is one thing the city was considering doing to fund the plan, to pre-fund the unfunded. The first column that says 7% are numbers that are similar to what you've seen from CalPERS in their last report as of 6/30/18. So we also showed you what that might be at different returns for this year. So for example, if we do have a 0% return, the first year payment would not be $87,000. It would be $129,000. So that gives you an idea of the sensitivity of the unfunded. And I think the city was considering, maybe pre-funding CalPERS more quickly. Currently, they're using a 20-year schedule for you, funding it more quickly at 10, or even making bigger payments than that. Do you have any questions, or you want me to go to the next report for the OPEB plan?
Are there any council member questions before we move on? Okay. Joe, go ahead.
So in the OPEB plan, there's a detailed report that says City of Monte Sereno Retiree Healthcare Plan OPEB Pre-Funding Study, April 28th. Okay, so let's go down to let's see, there's slide numbers there. Go down to slide 5. I'm sorry, not slide 5. Slide 6. Okay? So from your financial report from 2019, if you looked in it and you looked what the OPEB plans unfunded was, it's not on this slide. It was $858,000. And because the plan is unfunded, the accounting rules say to calculate that amount, assuming a discount rate, a return that's equal to a municipal bond rate. So we used for 6/30/19 a 3.5% rate. So that the city provided us, this calculation goes way back to 6/30/18 and we projected forward. So the city gave us updated employee information currently, and we recalculated that number, and that's the last column on slide 6. So when this was done, bond rates, municipal bond rates, this is a bond buyer's 20 bond index. 2.25% was the index when we did this report. So if you didn't pre-fund the plan for 6/30/20, you would see something like an $838,000 liability unfunded. If you decide to pre-fund the plan in a fund that's going to earn a higher amount because you're going to invest, let's say, more in equities, then we can use a higher discount rate, which means we can get a lower liability. A higher discount rate means you expect the fund to earn more, and that additional earnings pay some of the benefits, so the city doesn't have to pay as much, so the contributions are lower. So, for example, we looked at CalPERS is OBEP funds. They're called CERBT, and 1, 2, and 3, which are, let's see, okay. So the CERBT1 fund is maybe 0.75% in equities, like the CalPERS pension fund, so it's a bit risky. But if you took some money and put it in CERBT1, we could use a 6.75% discount rate, and then if you asked us what the liability would be, it'd be $472,000, much less, because now you're pre-funding it and you're expected to have some good earnings. If you went to a more conservative fund, more fixed income in 2 or 3, the return would be lower and the liability would be higher. It would go to $498 and $543. So you can see the difference in what the city would owe based on where you're investing funds if you pre-funded the plan. Now you could, let's say you use CERBT number 1. You could send the fund a check for $472,000 and say, hey, we're 100% funded. And that might change in the future as different employees come and go and retire different than was expected, and if the fund earns more or less than 6.75. So you know from the pension plan that that'll change over time. But if you didn't put a lump sum in the OPEB plan and wanted to fund it over 10 years, I would get the numbers that are on the bottom section of that page. So, for example, CERBT1, the thing we call the normal cost is what you're going to put aside every year for the current employees. That would be $76,000. Then you would have to pay off that unfunded $472 over 10 years, just like you're doing with the pension plan. That would be $59,000. So the total is $135,000. But you're already making payments to retirees, so that's really part of the contribution. So if you were to pre-fund this over 10 years and not put an initial amount in, but just do it annually, it would look like $103,000. And that would go up 3% a year. It would go up with an assumption about salary increases. So you could see for the number 2 and number 3, it would be a little higher because you would earn less in the fund. The CERBT is not the only trust out there. For example, PARS and PFM have OPEB trusts you can use also. So on slide 7, the city manager asked us also to project out the amortization payment for that unfunded. And it goes up at 3% every year for 10 years. Okay. Now, if you look at slide 9, it looks a lot like slide 6. Okay, but the title says give people the PEMCA minimum. The PEMCA minimum is the smallest benefit you can get. You can give people if you're in PEMCA with CalPERS, and this year it's like $139 a month. So if you were to say, let's change all our future retirees, including the active people currently working. Not that you're going to do it, but let's say you do that. Then the numbers for the actives on this I'm sorry. I got you looking at the wrong one again. Look at slide 10, okay? Because that has the contribution numbers. So you still have to fund what the retirees are being paid. But if you say everybody who works now, when they retire, gets this one minimum amount, and everybody who's hired in the future gets this minimum amount, look at the normal cost in the first column. It's now $22,688. So that's the cost for the active employees. And if you compare it to that prior slide 6, it's 30% of that number. So your ongoing cost would go down by 70%. The 56,000 amortization you still have, because that's you're paying off. Well, that's going to be lower too. Yeah, it's not that much lower because you still got to pay off the liability for the retirees, but it's a little lower because you're giving a lower benefit to the people who are working right now. So what your options are in negotiations is a lot of cities would say, we're going to change the benefit. Let's only do it for people who are hired in the future. In that case, these numbers wouldn't change from the prior slide until you start hiring new people and start seeing that savings. You could say this applies to current employees also, if you wanted to do that and can negotiate that. If you just do it for new hires, what slide 10 will show you when I say the cost is 30% of the current number, is that's what you'll see over time as you have all new employees. So it's an ultimate goal. So if you just give it to new hires, the cost will go down from where it is now for active employees at normal cost to about 30% of what you have now. It just takes time to get there. Some cities might also change the benefit for retirees currently, but that's something a lot of cities and agencies don't do, but it's also something, I guess, can be considered. You might wind up getting some retirees upset enough that they file a lawsuit, for example, and try to keep you from doing that. Okay, so I think that, let me see, that's all I have, except toward the end there's a memo to City Council. That was a draft that I provided your city manager that he looked at when he drafted his memo. It summarizes all the things I talked about in those more lengthy reports. So do you have any questions about any of this?
Thank you, Mr. D'Onofrio. Before I open it to council member questions, I just want to be mindful to not sort of toe into labor issues, given that that's a closed session item. So if we're ready for questions with council member Labouvet.
Hi. Yeah. So thank you for bringing this topic forward, Mr. City Manager. You know, we've been really, I think, me and some of the other council members have been really pushing hard on understanding these long-term pension liabilities, and especially the OPEBs, and those numbers were just large and scary. And it's very nice to actually get a very good handle on it and a factual basis from which to make some decisions. Now, I wanted to add sort of one more dimension to this, and I prepared some slides. So maybe we can try something novel and do a screen share. I circulated these if the screen share is not working, and we can follow along on your PC. But maybe we can try Gloissy. So I believe if I can say share my screen, there is content playing. So let's see if this works. Hmm. Oh, this one. So can you see a full screen now? Is anybody off mute?
No, we can't see a full screen. We just see 4 council members.
Oh, I bet you Gloisy has to enable the screen share for me.
I don't know if you can add it as a supplemental agenda item, because people like me who are on the telephone won't be able to see it anyway.
I put it in I put it in an email, but I wanted to be able to display it just like.
Okay, is this the one you sent an email? Okay, so
Yeah.
but that was sent out to council.
Councilmember Labouvet, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do at our end to be able to share your screen.
Can you display, or does Steve have power to display?
Councilmember Lubave, I think it would be best if we just ask all the council members to look at your slideshow, and maybe you can kind of walk us through it individually on their computers if they're in front of a computer.
Okay.
Gloisy, you'll need to make that available as a public record, in case anybody asks for copies of that.
Actually, is there, Steve? Are you sure that there's not a way to do this, because it's quite detailed, and it would be.
I'll make sure to do that, Sergio.
Is there really a way to?
Well, here's what we can do. I can try to work with Dave, the IT guy. He's here now in the interim. And if other council members have questions, they can ask those questions, and we can get back to this. We'll see if we can get this up on the screen. But as Councilmember Elahi mentioned, some of us are phoning in. I think Councilmember Turner phoned in. Yourself.
No, I'm on this. I haven't phoned in.
So I'm not sure who can actually visualize our screen.
Hi, Steve. Mayor Lawler here. All 4 of us, the only council member who's called in is Councilmember Elahi.
Okay.
At this point, why don't we go on the table, and we'll come back. We'll circle back to Councilmember Labouvet.
Okay, and I'll see if we can do something to get it viewable.
Okay.
I just actually there was a way to upload a meeting file, and I just did that. So now the question is, how do you actually just make it visible? Oh, I can say play file. So let's see if that works now.
Yep, there it is.
Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Our problems have been solved. Thank you.
Okay. So if you hit the hide webcams and make it full screen, it'll be a lot easier to kind of look at this, because it's quite big.
Yeah, I'm able to look at it on my phone. So.
Okay. So, yeah, I apologize for not getting this out sooner. I was took a while to digest this information, and okay. So how do I advance
Thank you
the
for
screen?
your effort. It looks like a good project.
Yeah. How do I advance the screen now? Switch down. No.
Councilmember Labouvet, it looks like I can just hit the arrow and scroll for myself if you're looking for.
Oh, how are you doing it?
Well, I have down at the bottom of the screen.
Okay. Well, okay. Was it okay? I think it's working now. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So can you see? I have a slide called motivation.
Yes.
Okay. So this is slide number 2. It's called motivation, pension and OPEB funding. So essentially, this is a very complex topic, and very important and fiscally significant. Furthermore, even reflected in the reports, there was concerns about COVID effects on the economy and Monte Sereno's financial outlook. And so I felt like it was a prudent course of action to use the the mid-year budget update and the Q3 treasurers and revenue and expenditures report as a baseline, and then do some forecasting on the COVID impact for our Q4 revenues and also into 2020. And in the context of this, then we can evaluate pension and OPEB options in a quantified way. Next slide. There we go. So I did a forecast. So I basically took Ray's mid-year forecast and then hacked on it a bit in the blue column, and I made some assumptions. I basically said that, hey, everything that is sort of related to the economy in terms of revenue, license and permits, and gas tax, and real property tax, and sales tax, I just capped those at the Q3 actuals that have already been recognized. And I said, okay, well, on the revenue side, we may not get any more revenue this year, so let's just use that as a conservative assumption. On the expense side, I just left our expenses alone. And so basically for Q4, or the remainder of FY19, it basically came out to about a 6% revenue reduction and flat expenses, and that affects our net income very similar to what our original FY19 range was. You may not be aware, so take a look at the column labeled, it's the second column at the very bottom. Our original budget for FY19 was a net income of minus 200K. And then after the mid-budget update, our net income actually went up. So Ray was able to optimize those numbers. And now if you apply a 6% delta on the revenue, we're likely to come out kind of in that, minus 184 to 200K range again. So that's not, too unexpected. Then next slide. So then I took a look at what this might mean forecasting into 2020. And so doing kind of the same exercise, I capped the revenue side at the Q3 actuals of this current year, and then also decreased the property tax by 5%. And so if you tile this all in, it overall out to a net revenue of minus 10%. So, in a ballpark range, 10% is probably a good estimate of what we're going to see in terms of a revenue loss for 2020. If you look at the expense side, so, the expenses are built up in multiple layers, but the first layer is really sort of our basic operating and basic capital expenses. And so I left these mostly flat from previous year, except for I just put a buffer in there for personnel salary increasing 10%. That's probably not where it's going to end up, but we'll see. I tiled in the police gave us a forecast already, so I tiled that new number in. And other than that, the only thing I did was I took out under what is it? I took out the capital improvement program, but I left the pavement improvement program. We had already met and decided on pavement improvement that we wanted to continue that program. And it has a 250K grant, and then we add another 60K, and that allows us to meet the goals that Jessica was asking for. And you can see that on the maintenance line item. You can see 449,000 is that number. But the good news here is that if you tile in even a 10% revenue decrease, and then also make some assumptions on the expense side, kind of your starting base before you start adding other capital projects is a positive net income of 433,000. So that's actually a pretty good result. I was kind of happy. That's a nice starting point. So then next slide. So then from there, as the Bartel Associates laid out, we have a couple options for OPEB to consider. The way I sort of understood these options were we can, and actually, this is actually sort of a new thing because I stumbled on this when I was looking into the budget. Now, it turns out that we've been actually accruing for OPEB in our general fund, and it has a designation against it. And I went back a few years, and that accrual has actually been year for year increasing over time. And so currently in the general fund, there is already a designation in the general fund of $325,000 for OPEB. And so that's a bit of new information that wasn't really taken into account in the Bartel calculations and it wasn't reflected in any of our annual reporting. The reason I'm assuming is because those designations are non-binding. And so, but as a matter of good practice, our previous administrations were actually accruing against those benefits. So we have an option. We have a current balance of 325. We can then add the Bartel calculation for the UAAL and the 2020 accrual, assuming PEMCA minimums. That would bring it to, we would need to add basically another 150K to that amount to bring it up to a full 475, and that would pretty much be what the Bartel calculation would be, sort of fully funded. Now, if we want to try to preserve cash, we can just retain that in our general fund as a designation. But then, of course, because it's not earning the assumed 6.75% interest, the UAL will continue to accumulate by that difference in rate. Another option, as I understood it, could be to establish a CBIRT pre-funding account. So, we could easily take our, the balance in our general fund in terms of designations and just push that into a CBIRT account that might yield some more interest and actually fulfill the obligation or the assumptions that the Bartel Associates made for us. And so that's another option. And then the last option, which kind of I like, is that we could formally establish the PAYGO OPEB policy. We've been kind of doing this on the fly anyways, where we're just paying out of operating expenses. And so, for me, the Monte Sereno retiree pool is unlikely to exceed 3 to 5. And this can easily be funded from operating expenses. PERS choice medical plans are 861, times, per month times 12. That's about 10K per retiree annually. So, because Monte Sereno is so small and we have pretty few retirees, it doesn't, for me, make a lot of sense to pre-fund $500,000, because what you're really doing is you're saying, hey, I have a number of retirees, and I'm going to fund it, out to 30 years. But, the assumptions, swing quite dramatically if one or two people drop out based on, comers and leavers in the organization, or even we have retirees that are eligible for benefits but don't collect the benefits for one reason or another. And so, trying to pre-fund this kind of a plan with such small numbers is not really statistically very valid. So this might be a good option for us. Now, the fact that we already have these OPEB accruals designated in our general fund, this would be, very good funds to sort of divert towards the CalPERS lump sum payments for the normal pension stuff. Next slide. So on the pension side, as Joe mentioned, we have about almost 700K for classic side and around 3,000 on the PEPRA side of earned benefits. Now these are earned benefits, right? And so if we were following proper finance procedures, anytime somebody is accruing an earned benefit, we should be paying it with recurring revenue. So the fact that these liabilities have been accumulating, but also at the same time our general fund has been accumulating, is sort of a violation of that accrued benefit, or accrued expenses need to be paid with accrued revenues. And so, so the monies that got into the general fund should never have found their way there under proper, finance processes where you have, you pay your liabilities first and then you do discretionary things next. Furthermore, the COVID impact on investment returns will likely increase this UAL in FY 2020 and beyond. I think that's just common sense. Another option is, do nothing, which is our 20-year amortization. And when I looked at these funds, I thought it was like 1 7 1/8. I could be wrong. It might be 7%. So this is 7% interest against our 700K. Or another option on the table was to accelerate that funding on a 10-year amortization, which then we end up paying 200, almost $80,000 worth of interest. Or we could do a lump sum payoff and just, then next year, whatever kind of increases come along, we'll at least have the slate wiped clean this year. Next slide. So these slides are actually from the CalPERG's estimates, and for me, it just sort of reiterates, if we keep as we go and we amortize our 700K over 20 years, we basically pay double in interest, right? So does it really make sense to finance 700K and have to pay 700K to finance it? And then the second part of this is that if we want to reduce the amortization to 10 years, so in order to finance the 700K, you end up paying 300K. And so, it's you pay half. And so if you leave that money sitting in the general fund at not very high interest, then, so let's say you leave the 700K, when you come back, it's really only going to be 400K when you come back to it. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Secondly, as Joe sort of alluded to, the sensitivity analysis, if the interest rate goes down just by 1%, you almost double the liability. And so, for me, it's kind of an urgency to sort of wipe this stuff off, just because of, both the amortization piece the annuitization piece, and the, it just, a 1% deviation just doubles this liability. And so, better to just clean it up and get rid of it if we have the ability to do so. Next slide. So then I basically forecasted again into 2020 and said, hey, what other kind of big expenses might we expect in 2020, and do these sort of big payoffs fit into the budget? And so we can see that if, and I took liberties to just tile a bunch of stuff in here. And so if you look at this it's about halfway down the page where it says other expenses. So this is the way this spreadsheet works, is this is just a list of options that we could or could not do. Now, historically, we've been doing kind of a 500K capital improvement. We've also had another variety of sort of other expenses tiled into this area of the budget. So for this one, I was just exploring what would the budget look like if we tiled in a full payoff of the CalPERG's Classic and Prima, and also put in a 500K type capital improvement program, that might be for the ADA improvements in community center, or a road project. I think you'd have to pick one or the other. But I just wanted to explore, hey, does this bust the budget, or does this actually fit? And what it turns out is that if you look at kind of the final number, you sort of have a starting balance. So I take the net income of the budget and apply that to a snapshot of our savings accounts, to just sort of find out, where would we be, what's our beginning balance of our savings and what's our ending balance of our savings. That's the way I did this analysis. And so the beginning balance is something like 6.1 million, and that comes from the previous year, assuming, also that 6% COVID hit in revenue. And then our ending balance would be something like 5.3. So, 5.3 is still a very comfortable number. It allows us to do a lot of designations. And so let's explore that just a little bit more in detail. Next slide. So, for example, if you took the OPEB designation that already exists in the general fund reserves and applied that partially, and then to the CalPERS lump sum payoffs, and then complete those payoffs also. We kind of get a freebie here where we've already had from previous councils some accruals that seem to fit nicely to go pay at least half of this stuff off, and then we only have to come up with the other half. Next slide. And then, for this property improvement designation towards the capital improvements, we also have had a designation in there for property improvement reserve. So that was always, we had 200K sort of earmarked for redoing the annex building. Now, that project might be much more, so I was just guesstimating at some, a maximum of 500K. But, at least we have 200K already earmarked that would apply against that 500K. Next slide. And furthermore, what I also noticed was, if you notice in the designations that go kind of year for year, so I have listed here FY18, and then our original FY19 budget, and then into the revised budget. But if you look at kind of historically, the economic fluctuation reserve has historically been at 3.5 million. Last year, it got taken down to 3 million. Given COVID, that's probably not such a wise thing. I think we should probably replenish it back to 3.5. Again, these are non-binding designations, but we should, to tell the right story, we should probably earmark 3.5 there. We should probably use our capital improvement reserve and then replenish it back to the 500K mark, because surely next year or the year after we're going to want to do another big capital improvement project. And then that's it. The budget kind of fits nicely around those items. I mean, of course, we would not have any OPEB accruals living in this account, because we would just be pay as you go for OPEB going on, and we would also have spent the property improvement reserve for the annex building. Next slide. So we get to kind of a conclusion where this COVID impact, I estimated that on the Q4 and the 2020 budget. I was able to review these numbers with Ray, and I think we pretty much agreed on at least the methodology. I didn't get a chance to really dig into his reply back to me today, but I think that was a different technical issue than what I was using to form my conclusions. Actually, I appreciate that Ray dug into that, because I originally was using those numbers and was coming up with things that just didn't make sense to me. And so I used a different baseline to make these estimates. But that's good that Ray was able to find that error and correct it. Again, the budget that I forecasted continues to include the pavement management program funded at 310. And then I explored a couple of options for these other expenses. And kind of to summarize, I think the budget actually fits quite nicely if we're able to modify the OPEB benefits to these PEMCHA minimum amounts for active and new employees, and even retirees if possible. That's part of the union negotiation. I think we should explicitly define the OPEB pay-go policy to fund from operating expenses. For 3 retirees, this is in the range of 30K. For 5 retirees, it's only 50K. In the scope of a $4 million budget, that's kind of in the noise. And I think that we can apply the existing general fund OPEB designation towards the CalPERS payoffs. And I think that there's already a designation for the annex building. And so, I think the conclusion here is that doing all the things that I've heard council members sort of talk about for this next coming year, I think it fits very nicely into the budget, even with COVID impact. And so I think we have a good starting point with a lot of data now, and that can help drive our decisions. And that's it. Thanks.
Well, Councilmember Labouvet, thank you for that great presentation. That was
Now I have to figure out how to get back to non-screen share.
well, thank you for that. That was very illuminating. We have other council members. Why don't I go to Council Member Turner?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment here. I think our revenue for this year and probably and last year, the year before, is high because of the Hacienda Inn. And I'm not really sure if anybody has information about what are we going to look like when we're done with Hacienda. So that's one comment. The next comment that I have is reducing CalPERS liability. I think it would behoove us to actually look at CalPERS health insurance uh, and some of the other things that we have talked about. And I'm not going to go into that. And those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Council Member Alahi, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I appreciate Dan's presentation. I think he's done a master class. We probably need to spend more time and hours digesting some of it. I would think, one question I had whether issuing a bond has been considered. Apple just issued $3 or $4 billion worth of bond at about 1.2% or 0.8, a little bit above treasury rates. So this may be a good time for Monte Sereno maybe to consider issuing bonds to fund the pension liabilities. If our interest payment on the bond is going to be much less than what PERS is making us pay to them because of their inefficiencies, I guess. I don't know if somebody's looked at that or that was part of the report or not. Maybe the accountant can answer that question, or it would be the pension people who prepared the report. Because there would be quite a margin there between the bond rates these days for cities, and these may be tax deductible bonds. If you can issue them at 1% and fund our pension liability, which sticks us with 5 or 6% or more, that may be another option to consider part of the issues.
Mayor Lawler, if I can respond to Councilmember Elahi's question.
Yes, please.
So, Councilmember Elahi, thank you for the question. Right now, as it exists, Monte Sereno does not have a policy regarding borrowing money or issuing debt. But you bring up a good point. The rates are very low, and this should be something we should discuss at another time in more depth, probably when we were looking at adopting the financial policies, which will probably be coming up along with the budget here in the next couple of weeks. We'll start talking about these things. But one strategy may be you have the streets that we're funding, and we do a little bit at a time every year, but perhaps borrow some money to pay for the streets all at one time and perhaps bid them and get a better price. That might be a strategy to pursue, and then just pay back a smaller amount of money and focus on using the reserves rather on the streets to pay down the unfunded liabilities. There's some kind of a fulcrum in there that makes everything economically worthwhile and beneficial, but all those ideas can be explored in more depth. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, can we get some expert to give us some help with that? Because it doesn't matter what the funds are used. I guess it may matter what the funds are used for, but there are definitely, and I don't know if there's some COVID-related funds that came under the CARE program for cities or not. But I think we should have somebody really look at the numbers and see what kind of bond, because you have to have a credit rating also, and cities
Yes.
all have to have a Moody's credit rating. It's a whole process. So maybe you should get, find the right personnel people who do this kind of stuff.
Yes, and I think that's a good idea. I know I was talking to our interim finance manager, Reynolds here, and we do not file a CAFR on an annual basis. That may be a requirement in order to be able to get the best bond rating, comprehensive annual financial report. That costs about, I think it was another $20,000 or something from our auditor to file that CAFR. But that may be a requirement to go and borrow on bonds. But in the previous agency that I worked at, we did borrow some money through West Valley Sanitation District, and the bond rates were very low. That was before all this problem we have now. Last fall, they were something about 1.8% to borrow. They were borrowing $25 million on a bond. So I know that the rates would be very attractive at this point. And if we were able to combine that with perhaps the construction work will be less because of the recession or potentially coming recession, we can get work crews to do the streets at a lesser price or whatnot. That might be the best of both worlds to bid all the streets at one time, and we can potentially save some money. But those are good ideas to explore. So thank you. We will look into these things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leonardis. Next, I'll move on to Mayor Pro Tem Luthold.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Dan, for all your hard work. And I'm looking forward to discussing this in more detail as we get into the budget session. I think you've given us a huge boost and great options to look at this. So well done. Mr. Leonardis's comments about the streets as a potential place to follow up with Councilmember Elahi's comment about bonds, I think is a good idea. The pavement management is another of those things. If we stay ahead of it, we actually get much better return than if we do it at a slower rate. And that was part of the pavement management report. So that's another thing that's worth considering. I think good ideas as we go into the budget season here to take a look at all of those things. I had a couple of comments that I want to take a look at further. One is the rate of return calculations that are being used here, those 6 3/4%. I think we're going to need to keep an eye on that because I think that's one of the things that's going to catch us by surprise. If those funds suddenly come back and are paying 2 or 3%, that's going to throw those calculations way off. So I think we need to model some of those possibilities if we're looking at the idea of expectations of some of those future earnings and the discount rates that go with them. But I think Dan's on top of that and will keep us honest as we look at all of that so we can make some good decisions going forward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Luthold. Mr. D'Onofrio, would you like to say something? Mr. D'Onofrio, are you still there? I got your message that you'd like to speak.
Yeah, sorry, I had me on mute. Okay. So could we look at some of the numbers in Councilmember LaBou's report on slide 5? And I think you probably got most of these numbers from my summary, and I know I gave you lots of numbers. So could you go back to the larger OPEB report and look on slide 6? Okay. So the first column at 6.75% has an unfunded of 472,000. So I think that's where you got your 475 from. So if you look on my slide 10, if you did change the benefit to be the PEMCA minimum, that number would be 449. Okay. But on the other hand, in your slide 5 second bullet, the 127,312. That's what CalPERS told you your contribution was, and that included an amount for the active employees and paying off the unfunded over 20 years. The 22,688 came from my summary, but if you look on slide 10, I call that the normal cost. So that's the active piece. We still have to add the 56,086, the 56,000 to pay off the unfunded. So the 22,688 should be 78,774. Okay, so that should be higher by 56, but the 475 could be lower by about 25. Okay. Then if you look on your slide 6, This is a small number, but the PEPRA unfunded 2009-54. CalPERS has actually included that in your 2021 contribution, the whole thing. So if you go to your PEPRA contribution and pay what CalPERS told you to pay for 2021, you will have paid that. So I just wanted to point that out to you. And on the next slide, where you had a discount rate change, and I think you know this, but I just wanted to point out, CalPERS is assuming that their fund will earn 7% over the long term. What they're showing you there is if it earns 6% every year for the long term, rather than 7. And they show you that because they change the discount rate now and then, and they want to show you the impact. When you looked at one of my reports and I had different returns, they were just the returns for 1920, and they assumed 7% going forward after that 1 year. I think you know that, but in case, I just wanted to point that out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. D'Onofrio. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councilmember Jose.
Can I just confirm? So I'm just trying to understand. So back to slide 5. So I was taking the current benefits or the retiree benefits of 338. That's not the right number. Plus the normal cost just for this category, because then the expected retiree payments I had tiled in to a different line item because that's a recurring item. So I was just trying to calculate what the unfunded piece was. And then it was net of this 325 that we already had sitting there. So that's why it's 325 plus. So this 127 is actually a little bit of a rounded number. I rounded it up. So it's this 325 plus 127. It equals the AAL, and then the 22,668 was your normal cost.
The 325 is like your balance, right? Your reserve.
Yeah, because we already have that sitting in reserve.
Okay, and that's less than the 475. So.
Right, exactly. That's less. So I basically just said, hey, we need to. If we have a current balance and we want to shore up that current balance to your numbers, you would have to add these additional monies, basically 150K, and then that would get to our unfunded piece plus the normal contribution. And then in another part of the budget that's recurring, we would pay the 30K as a recurring expense.
Okay. So the 127,312, that's you're paying the CalPERS contribution unfunded over 20 years. That's part of that number.
No. So I was just trying to pay it off in full.
Oh.
Yeah, that's not an amortization at all.
Okay. So I saw that number in CalPERS's report for the 2021.
I got that number off of your report, actually. That was off of slide. I got that off of slide.
Well, maybe it's a coincidence.
I think this is slide 9. I was targeting this 438 number. Oh wait, or the 449 number I was targeting. The unfunded AAL. I think that math works, right?
So you're on my slide 9?
Your slide 9, yeah.
And the 127,312 is on there?
127. Oh. So 127,312 is your 449,665 number for your unfunded AAL under the PEMCA minimum for the city cost minus 325,000. Yeah, and then it's rounded up a little bit. I was just trying to make an even number. So if I take year 449665 on page 9
Okay.
and subtract off what we already have accrued in our general fund, which is 325,000, you get to 124,665, and then I just rounded that up to 127 so I could make an even number. And then the 22,688 number is your normal cost for.
Okay.
Okay, so is that clear?
Okay. It just happens to be your CalPERS contribution is 127,332. No,
That's too much.
So I thought you were adding those two together there.
No. So this is. I was just trying to get to a full payoff scenario. So there's no amortization whatsoever.
Great, I got it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for double checking me.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a quick question for Councilmember LaBouvet, actually. I was looking at this. I like the idea of using the 325 that we have for OPEB and applying that towards CalPERS. What would the benefit be of applying that and then amortizing the rest over 10 years versus paying the whole thing down? Because paying the whole thing down, to me, feels like throwing money into a hole that doesn't ever get filled. And so holding on to our money longer might be more beneficial. This is a case where debt is okay. Could you explain that? If that's
Sure. It really kind of is just power of interest, right? So we could pay off half of our debt and then leave the other half sitting in our reserves, but our reserves only make under 2%. And so whatever amount of money liability we have sitting on the CalPERG side is compounding by 7% per year. And so if you don't pay it off, and that debt doesn't go away, right? That's obligated debt from the Supreme Court of California, right? They are not going to give us a haircut. That debt will just continue to grow, and they'll continue to send bills to Monte Sereno until we're bankrupt. So for me, the advantage is and that's why I really went through the budget exercise, was to say, do we have enough room to pay these things off in our budget? And I think the answer is yes. And you guys can study those numbers and come to your own conclusions. But for me, even if we paid everything off, we still end the year with $5.3 million, right, in savings. And I think that's still a very comfortable position to be in. And so if we have the financial ability to pay it off, rather than have something collecting 7% interest, I think that's a better deal. And also, furthermore, like even trying to borrow money at cheap rates, nothing is, we're holding cash sitting in our general fund reserves at less than 2%. And, you would have to work with those spreads. So anything less than 7% return doesn't get the job done, in my opinion. So it's similar to sort of paying off your house before you retire, so you don't have all of those interest expenses. So that's just my opinion. You guys can come to your own conclusion.
Got it. Okay, thanks. At this point, do we have any kind of feeling about how we want to do this? Do we want to push this out?
Mayor Lawler,
Yes.
I have one letter that was sent to everybody earlier in the week from Lon Allen, and I don't know, it is a public hearing. I could read this letter into the record.
Okay.
If you're okay with that.
Yes.
Or we can just acknowledge the receipt. I think everyone on council has seen the letter. It was emailed last Friday, but I can go ahead and read it if you'd like.
Please.
It says, "Dear Council, as you know, I led the effort to fully pay off our UAL unfunded actuarial obligation to CalPERS back in fiscal 2017 when I was mayor. Sadly, given the poor performance of CalPERS, our UAL is greater today than what we fully paid off just 4 years ago. Upon reflection, I believe the staff's thoughtful recommendation of a 10-year amortization plan is the option that the council should seriously consider. I also think that our city, like San Jose, should engage in what the late John Foster Doles called an agonizing reappraisal of what type of retirement benefits should be offered to future hires. Retired or existing employees' benefits are, of course, vested and not subject to change. Given the coronavirus impact on the financial markets, CalPERS UAL is only going to get worse. We must accept this financial reality in deciding what retirement benefits we can responsibly offer to future employees. Lon Allen.
Great, thank you. Are there any other members of the public speaking on this item? Is that it?
That's it.
You just
Gloissy, are there any members of the public who can speak on this?
none at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Close the public hearing. Well, it sounds like, I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but this sounds like something that we need to continue to consider going into the budget process. Is that something that we can push out for a couple weeks to have more thought process on this? What are your thoughts?
So,
Yes.
Sean Muthel speaking. I think that was my understanding, was that we now are armed with good information and are really on top of this issue as we go into the budget season here. And my expectation, at least on my part, was that we would be considering these options as we look at the budgeting going into next year. So if I'm wrong about that, please correct me, but otherwise I think that.
Okay, great, thank you. Then thank you, Mr. Leonardis, and thank you, Joe D'Onofrio, for your report. Are we ready to move on to unfinished business? Item number 8, report on status of local emergency and consideration of terminating local emergency. Mr. Leonardis?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lawler. So there was a new county health order issued. We are sheltering in place now until May 31st. Monte Sereno employees are working mostly from home, except essential city services are being provided. We are listed on the county EOC report as a partial/virtual EOC, Emergency Operations Center. Our planning and building counter is closed to the public. We are accepting planning and building applications touchless, which means residents can call in and make an appointment to drop their plans off outside our door. And then either the planner or the building official will go out, pick up the plans with gloves and all that stuff, and review them and correspond with the applicants over the telephone, arrange for payments, arrange for the building inspections, et cetera, et cetera. Building inspections will be completed using all social distancing, face masks, whatever it takes to prevent the spread or minimize the spread of COVID, as according to the county health order. In Santa Clara County, COVID cases appear to be easing a bit. However, we're still in this thing, as we all know. And the county is using 5 key indicators on their public health website. Take a look at these indicators. They all seem to be stable or in decline. But we must continue with our good habits: social distancing, washing hands, sheltering, all the things that we've heard. This week, the state will be easing some restrictions, going into what's called phase 2 of the 4-phase plan to get back to normalcy and open up with the economy. However, Santa Clara County public health order is what we have to abide by, even if it is more restrictive than the state order, because we operate under the order of the county health officer. And I just received some information about, the deaths in the county and all those kinds of things. The good news is the testing is increasing. The cases of COVID are decreasing with the increased testing. There's been 2,104 deaths in California. And just looking for the number here in Santa Clara County, I think we're up to 121 as of today. My recommendation, of course, is to continue with the emergency status we are currently operating under. And this concludes the report. I'm open for questions, if any, from council.
Great, thank you, Mr. Leonardis. Are there any questions from council at this time? Nope. Okay. Moving on to item 9, council consideration of increased temporary construction hours. Shall I ask Mr. Rudin for a report, or Mr. Leonardis, how would you like to proceed?
Thank you, Mayor Lawler. I was just going to introduce the item, and if Mr. Rudin would like to add to the report, that would be wonderful. So essentially, this item was requested from council to be put on the agenda at our previous meeting by 2 council members, and it was brought forth by a resident. The resident wants to provide, the thinking is provide the opportunity for construction hours to be increased by 1 hour in the morning. Currently, the city of Monte Sereno operates from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays. The proposal would be to start at 7 a.m. Monday through Friday and go to 8 p.m. And on Saturday, I think it would remain the same. Essentially, this requires a change to our noise ordinance, and I would let Mr. Rudin kind of cover the details on that and what it entails to honor this or consider this request this evening. If Mr. Rudin, if you could let the council know the process involved with changing the ordinance and how long it would take and what would be required to move forward with this idea.
The resident's suggestion was that this could be done by an urgency ordinance, although certain places they refer to a resolution. The city's prohibition on construction noise is a provision in the city code, and it's it is local law. In order to modify local law, the city has to pass an ordinance, which typically requires 2 readings, and would go into effect 30 days after the second reading is adopted. The only exception to that 30-day effective period is where the city can pass an urgency ordinance, but state law imposes restrictions on when we can do that. It can only be done for the immediate preservation of public peace, health, and safety, and the city council really does have to have some sort of findings that this action is necessary, in order to urgently preserve public peace or public health or public safety. And additionally, it would require a 4/5 vote in order to pass. So in light of that, it doesn't seem particularly pragmatic to try to do an urgency ordinance, but the council could direct staff to work on putting together an ordinance to make this modification of construction hours that would go into effect 30 days after we did the second reading. So that's certainly something that council could consider and direct staff to do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rudin. I suppose I'll open this up to council. Does anyone have any comments at this time? Mayor Pro Tem Luthold.
Yes, thank you. I did have a comment, and as one of the lawyers on the council, I'm always appreciative of Sergio's conservativeness and trying to keep everything on the straight and narrow. On the other hand, as a council member trying to be responsive to the community, I'm looking for solutions, not inaction. So the question that I have is really whether it would push things too far to have the city manager using the emergency powers that are vested in him simply override the local ordinance as we have overridden so many local ordinances under the emergency and the shelter in place that we're operating under. It seems to me that overriding a noise ordinance to make up for the overriding of all of the other things that have been disrupted here, including construction hours for the last almost 2 months now, is a very small step and would be perfectly justified by the city under the emergency powers that we have ongoing with the city manager. So that's my point of view on this, and I'd really be interested, number one, if we have a majority of the council or a 4/5 of the council who agree with that, and then whether the city attorney tells us, no, you cannot do that, or sure, do that, and it'll probably be fine. It may or may not be perfect, but who's going to complain if you're solving a problem rather than creating one? It's not taking 2 months to do it. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Turner, any comments? Councilmember Turner, do you have any comments?
Oh, sorry, I kept talking. Yes, I do have comments. I agree with our council's assessment. And what I'd like to do is to see if we could have a motion along that line. So I'd like to make a motion to actually support Sergio's recommendation.
Okay.
Mayor,
I believe we might have some public comment first, though. Is that correct, Mr. Leonardis?
yes, Mayor Lawler, we received 4 pieces of public correspondence in addition to the one submitted by the original resident requesting the item be put on the agenda.
So shall we read any of that into the record, or is there anyone?
I'm glad to do so if council is, if they're ready to move to that point. If they have no further questions, then the public hearing could be kind of open and closed. I could read the items into the record at that point.
Okay, let me finish calling on everyone, and then we'll proceed to that. Councilmember Labouvet.
Yeah, I have I guess a question back to Sergio. Is it possible to use the powers to do this, or do we still need to do it and completely change the law?
I mean, my recommendation would be to make this modification via the city's regular process for adopting ordinances. Looking at the city code and the Emergency Services Act that relate to the power of the city manager as director of emergency services to make emergency rules, the city code states that it really is the power to make and issue rules and regulations on matters reasonably related to the protection of life and property as affected by such emergency. And additionally, you know, if those rules were made, they would need to be confirmed by the city council, as provided in our code. You know, again, there are a number of things that you know, COVID has impacted adversely besides construction. As council member, or as Mayor Pro Tem Luthel mentioned earlier, I do tend to take a conservative and risk-minded approach to things, and typically, you know, try not to read provisions too expansively beyond their original intended purpose. There could be you know, if the council directed me to do so, I think we could probably try to make some findings justifying, you know, this is necessary for public, you know, health, safety, et cetera, as construction has been expanded, construction activities have been expanded under local county health orders. But my general thought process is these types of changes are best left to, you know, the regular ordinance adoption process.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I agree with Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Leuthold's recognition that this is very unusual times. On the other hand, I'm wondering if this is sort of diminishing returns. I didn't see any sort of uprising on Nextdoor or even letters to this agenda topic. You know, when time comes, I guess I'll support the motion to take to second the motion to move forward with Sergio's recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Labouvet. Councilmember Elahi, do you have any comments?
I think it raises an issue on whether construction people who are doing construction out there need to come in early and have a better shot at doing the construction work that needs to be done. I'd like to see some input as to and like Sergio suggested, we could make a finding on that. But I think to make a finding, we do need to have some construction firms or construction workers send us some letters or some information saying, hey, how this would, you know, they really need to get this stuff going because some work has been delayed and projects are not getting done and things are getting delayed, and that's not in the best interest of the citizens of Monte Sereno. In the meantime, how long would it take to get if you were to go through Sergio's route, how long would that take to get the ordinance passed? Is there a minimum time delay between each reading? And is there a 30-day notice requirement or a 10-day notice requirement?
So there's a 5-day minimum time between each reading. We could have a special meeting to facilitate, you know, one of those readings. But otherwise, the government code prescribes that you must have at least a 5-day cooling off period before adopting an ordinance that's been introduced, unless it's an urgency ordinance.
So we could have the first reading at the next meeting, and then within 5 days later, we could have the second reading on it. Because we usually meet about every other week. So within about a month, we would have this done as in the proper channel. Is that right, Sergio?
That's right.
Okay.
All right, good, thanks. Mr. Leonardis, should I open it to public comment at this point? I know we have, but okay, go ahead.
First letter is from Philip Knopf, KNOPF. Says, City Manager, Mayor, and members of the Council, I am writing to support the work time to begin at 7 a.m. rather than the existing start time of 8 a.m. during weekdays. After being off work for over 6 weeks, this will be a benefit to the workmen. It might give them an extra hour of pay. Would also be a benefit to the projects as the workers are more productive in the morning. It would also give more time to complete the projects that have been put on hold. This should not be an inconvenience to the neighbors as it is light before 6 a.m. now, and most people are up getting the day going. Regards, Phil Knopf. Next letter from David Cullinane. City Council, allowing construction activities to start at 7 a.m. on a temporary basis would be fine with me. I live in the vicinity of 3 ongoing construction projects in Monte Sereno, including a major project at 18218 Daves Avenue. All of these projects have been idle with shelter in place, and I'd like to see these projects completed. While we can work from home, we know construction workers have to be idle for some time, and they need to get back to work. Also, our neighbors with construction projects are paying construction loans and temporary accommodations during the shelter-in-place delays, and they need to get into their homes. Please allow construction to start at 7 a.m. for at least the number of days that these projects have lost. Thank you. Stay healthy and safe. Dave Cullinane. Next letter is from Brian McCullum. City Manager, Mayor, and members of the Council, my name is Brian McCullum, and I am a resident of Monte Sereno, 17650 Daves Avenue. I am in full support of Phil Knopf's letter of allowing workers to start at 7 rather than 8. People need to get back to work and take care of their families. And the last one, and again, these are all excluding the original communication from the resident who suggested this idea to council. Dear City Council members and City Manager, during these difficult times, it is important we keep in mind that there are many people who live from paycheck to paycheck. Most people who work in construction fall into that category. It is therefore important that we in Monte Sereno do whatever we can to make their lives a little easier now that residential construction is allowed to resume. We fully support the proposal to allow construction to start at 7 a.m. during weekdays and continue until 8 p.m. on Saturdays. However, we suggest we stay with the current 9 to 5 schedule. This will result in larger paychecks for those working in construction and will allow builders to make up for some of the lost time. We live right next to one of the largest construction projects in Monte Sereno, a single-family house being built from scratch at 18216 Daves Avenue. We realize starting at 7 a.m. will increase the noise early in the morning, but that's something we can live with. Best regards, Avert and Nicolette Wolsheimer. And that is it, Mayor, for the 4 letters, excuse me.
Okay, thank you. We do have members of the public on listening here. Do we have anybody wishing to speak on this item, Boise, at this time? Do you have any? We have Brian Mekachuk online. Brian, would you like to make a comment? Okay.
Mayor Lawler?
Yes.
Oh, okay. No, I was just going to inform you that the messages are coming through not the proper channels. That's why I'm not reporting them.
Oh, okay. So he is texting, so we're seeing it. So I'm assuming that does not present a problem in terms of public hearing.
Right. There. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Then I will now close the public hearing, and I will bring it back to council. I do. We have a motion and a second, and I just want to make a comment that this proposal, which would obviously help builders, would equal to about 120 hours of extra work starting at 7 a.m. for 120 days. Given that our ordinance already allows for a 68-hour work week, we could recoup that 120 hours in an additional 10 days without making residents endure 7 a.m. jackhammers. So I'm a little concerned about the fact that we've already been asked to shelter in place and make sacrifices, and throwing in a 7 a.m. wake up call for construction might be a bit too much. And I also, agree with Mr. Rudin's assessment that going through the proper channels makes this process sort of, it's what's the point? It takes too long. So with that said, we have a motion and a second. And Boise, if you could take roll call vote, please.
Before we take that,
may I be heard?
Yeah.
Can I offer an amendment that this? I guess the motion is to follow the regular course on adopting ordinances. That's.
I think the motion is to heed Mr. Rudin's advice and not entertain a change to the ordinance.
Correct, but I think I'm sorry,
my recommendation was, certainly council can decide as a policy matter whether it wants to modify the construction hours. My recommendation was that if the council directs that we modify those construction hours, we do that via adoption of an ordinance. And looking at it further, the fastest way we could adopt a regular ordinance is we could have a special meeting next week to introduce it, and then an ordinance has to be adopted at a regular meeting, so it could be adopted on the 19th, would be the earliest.
Yeah, I would offer an amendment that we try to move this thing along and either put it on a special meeting or put it on our next meeting. And I assume you're going to be having a closed session in the next 2 or 4 weeks on some subject. So either that closed session time, you could also have a public hearing on the ordinance, and then that would allow us to move this thing forward. So my amendment offer would be to look for adopting an ordinance to move the start of time at 7 a.m., but do it in the manner that the court prescribes, but do it as expeditiously as possible.
Mr. Rudin, how do we proceed? Councilmember Turner, are you willing to make that amendment? What was your motion as it stands? Was dismissed?
I have a motion on the table, so I think what we ought to do is either act on that motion, deny it, or move on.
Well,
So-
technically, the amendment is
Pardon me,
motion.
Mr.
Yeah.
Member Turner, can you please repeat the motion? Councilmember
I'm
Turner,
sorry, did I miss you?
yes, can you please repeat your motion? You're on mute.
Sorry. My motion is to not adopt the change in the hours for construction from 8 a.m. to 7 a.m. for weekdays.
Okay. And we had a second to that, correct, Councilmember Labouvet? So let's take an action on this motion.
Yes, so normally, as a point of order, when an amendment is offered, you first vote on the amendment. You can vote it down or up either way, but then you vote on the motion.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Lahi. Let's then, so are you making?
Yeah, I'm making them, offering the amendment that we expeditiously consider adopting an ordinance to change the time to 7 a.m.
We would second on that.
And try to get that heard in normal meetings or in special meetings.
Do we have a second to that motion? No, we don't have a second, so I think that motion fails.
Actually, I'm sorry, I was reaching for my mute button. I'm willing to second Councilmember Elahi's motion to hear this expeditiously and consider it. My concern is whether this is a waste of time because we're talking about a temporary change. I don't think we should be considering a change to the ordinance for all time. Monte Sereno has been very clear they want the later start time. And so to look at a temporary ordinance, we could do that expeditiously and perhaps have it up and running in 40 days. And we would either vote for or against that when it comes up at a special meeting. So I would be for our debating that and trying to bring it up. But I do think 40 days is too late. I think we should be doing this now or not at all. But I'll second the motion and see if it passes.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can put it up within the next 3 to 4 weeks because we've got a hearing on the meeting in 2 weeks anyway, and then within a week we could put it up again if it's appropriate. Anyway, thank you for taking it.
To repeat, to be clear, what exactly is the motion? To consider changing the ordinance?
Well, the motion is to not changing. The motion is to consider changing the start time to 7 a.m. but putting it on calendar as per our established procedures for ordinances.
Okay.
As expeditiously as possible. Yes.
Mr. Rudin, I suppose we just go ahead and go to roll call on this one since this is the second motion. So
yeah, that would be fine.
Okay. Gloissy, can we do a roll call?
Yes. Councilmember Elahi?
Yes.
Councilmember Labouvet?
I'm not clear what we're voting on. So we're voting that somebody will bring another motion forward or a proposal forward in the next meeting?
Yes.
So,
we're voting on the change in the ordinance in the regular course of business as expeditiously as possible. That's what we're voting on. We're not saying change it, but we're voting on considering it as expeditiously as possible.
The direction that I understood, or the thrust of that motion as I understood it, is it would be to direct staff to bring back an ordinance for adoption as quickly as possible. That would make the change to construction hours from 8 a.m. to 7 a.m. for a period of 120 days.
That's correct.
I think I think this is sort of diminishing returns. I'll say no.
Okay. Councilmember Turner
I'll also say no.
and Mayor Lawler. Or sorry, excuse me, Mayor Pro Tem Luthol.
I'm a yes.
Mayor Lawler.
No.
Motion doesn't pass, as it is 2-3.
So that would mean that that amendment fails. We still have a motion on the floor to not consider any amendments to the city code with regards to temporary construction hours.
Thank you, Mr. Rudin. So Boise, can you take a roll call vote on this one, please?
Okay, will do. Councilmember Elahi,
No.
Councilmember Laboué,
Yes.
Councilmember Turner,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Luthol.
I'm going with a yes, only because I still think this should be done on an emergency powers basis. But since that's not the way things are going, I'll join the majority on this.
Thank you. Mayor Lawler.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 4-1.
Thank you. Moving on, committee commission reports. Do any council members have any reports at this time?
I do.
Mayor Pro Tem Luthol.
I attended the Joint Powers Library meeting last week. The library has been put under work from home as a non-essential county function. However, many of the library employees are themselves essential employees and have been working under the various emergency centers and staffing the emergency centers as part of their functions. The library for the Santa Clara County Library has stayed open, working electronically, and has showed incredible success in shifting to work from home, in expanding their programs, in issuing new library cards electronically, and is really a incredible showing of what can be done as people have worked to fulfill their core functions, even with the restrictions of working from the shelter at home. So very pleased with Monte Sereno's being part of the Joint Powers Library group, and I want to make sure that we are getting the information out about the programs that are available at the library, and as well that the libraries are able to issue new library cards. So if the city manager or the mayor wants to put that information up and some of those links, I know we've been receiving the information from the library, but I think it would be deserving of some extra push on Nextdoor. Or if you'd like to direct me to do that, I'd be happy to do that as well.
Mayor, I'm happy to do that. We were in the process of writing our weekly correspondence regarding the COVID crisis, and we send it out as an e-blast every week. But I'm happy to include the services, the electronic services of the library. We did post something, I think, on our webpage a couple weeks ago as well. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for bringing this forward, and we're happy to continue to advertise those wonderful services to the community.
That would be great. Thank you, Steve. Okay. Any other council member committee reports? Yes, Councilmember Laboué.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of bring to everyone's attention that the West Valley Clean Water Authority or Water Project, they had a huge media splash around Earth Day, and so they launched actually. So the 50th anniversary of Workday or Earth Day, they launched a big social media program, and so you may have somehow come in contact with on your normal feeds, but if you haven't, you can go to www.cleanwater.org cleancreeks.org and subscribe to their Facebook page and their Twitter page and their YouTube page. They have a quite informative YouTube video that they just released that really kind of describes what a watershed is and how to keep it clean and what the impact of the environment is. And they use all of this content, in the schools and in public outreach and so forth. And so I think they've just really done a fantastic job with this media blitz and really aligning it with Earth Day. The 50th anniversary of Earth Day was quite impressive for these folks. And so I want to congratulate them on doing a really great job. And please, if you have a inkling to go and check out that webpage and subscribe to those services, they'll pop up in your feed, and they're quite nice and quite informative, and they certainly kind of reflect our current surroundings. Also, those videos have pictures of Monte Sereno and Los Gatos and so forth. So encourage everyone to do that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other council member committee reports? All right. Then moving on to council member comments. Council member Turner.
Yes, I received an email from Ron Duridan Sr., and apparently he is with the Rotary Club, as well as he has held a number of public offices in many, many years. And he wrote about COVID, but he wrote a couple of sentences that I thought is relevant to us, so I'd like to read it to you. And it says, "Great compliments to Steve Leonardis for the reorganization of your fine city and the great web upgrade. Be careful you lose Steve to the tech industry." Thank you.
All right. Any other council member comments?
Yeah.
Councilmember.
Yes, Steve kind of had a 25 mile per hour sticker that he pointed out last time, because a lot more people are walking on the streets in Monte Sereno, and I think that's a good effort. I would also like to have a check on bushes and trees, because on some of the corner turns in the city, it's difficult to see people as they're walking when you make a right turn or a left turn, because of bushes or hedges that are growing probably taller than they need to be. I know we have a bush abatement program. So Steve, if you can have someone take a look at that, so that there is a safety concern. I know on our street, there are a number of elderly women who are walking, and there are a couple of blind spot corners around there. And, maybe I can talk to you afterwards specifically on some of those. But that's what we should look at. And I think people are driving probably closer to 15 or 20 miles in some of these areas, or should be, because there's so many people and dogs and everybody that's walking down there. So I would ask Steve to kind of take a look at that. Thank you.
Any other council member comments at this time?
Nope.
All right. Anyone? Okay. I just want to bring up one topic that at some point we're going to all be back in council chambers, hopefully sooner than later. And I'd like to start that conversation and work with our city manager on how we can accomplish reopening in that sense and adhering to the guidelines of social distancing and having face coverings, et cetera. So maybe that's a conversation that we can collectively work on together with our city manager. And that's it. And then moving on to our city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor Lawler. And I just want to say thank you for the comments. I was going to, again, ask Councilmember Elahi if I'm happy to work on the hedges and the bushes that are blocking views. We had our gardener resign, and our gardening service, they actually didn't resign, but they retired. They moved to Idaho. And we didn't know this. They had moved in March, and they had been trying to contact our previous finance officer. But to make a long story short, they were handling these kinds of requests, but we are able to handle these requests. So if you can get me specific addresses, we will get this taken care of as soon as possible. And moving on to my report, I just want to mention that our next meeting is our annual strategic goal setting session, May 12th at 7 p.m. and I was looking forward to possibly doing this as a live meeting, which I think would have been wonderful, but it looks like we will have to, because the continued shelter-in-place order, do it the way we are doing it now. Hopefully we'll have a few more bells and whistles by next week that we can add. So I'm working with IT on that. But I just wanted to notify the public that our annual strategic goals, which is a prelude to our essentially work calendar for the whole year and our budgeting process. It's a very important meeting. We look very forward to this next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. And one other item, tonight in the warrants, you approved the $5,000 grant to West Valley Community Services. So thank you for doing that. And the mayor and I are going to be deciding on arrangements to drop off that check this week. And West Valley Community Services will be adding us as a partner on their website. So we look forward to our city seal being added with the other wonderful cities of the West Valley on their website in the partners section, and the many other wonderful contributors to their organization. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Leonardis. Moving on to future agenda. Anybody have anything they'd like to see?
Yeah, I don't have a future agenda item, but I did want to, since Rotary came up, there's a Rotary meets every Wednesday morning on Zoom at 8:30 a.m. Tomorrow, Supervisor Mike Wasserman and our Police Chief Senior are going to be the guests. If you would like to attend, let me know. I'll send you the Zoom invite. It might be good to attend that meeting. Since it's 8:30, you can do it from your home. And no breakfast.
All right, thank you. All right. At this point, I guess it's time for us to adjourn. The City of Monte Sereno Council meeting for May 5th, 2020 is now adjourned at 9:06 p.m.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was awesome. Hey, we learned how to screen share. That was a good thing.
We'll get the hang of it eventually, just in time for us to reopen.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're entering the 21st century.
That's right. 20 years late, but that's okay.
All right, good night.
Yeah, it is.